Welcome to the kitchen. Apologies for the background hum in this video, if you can hear it. This electric clock makes a bit of a noise when it's quiet in here. When we moved into this house, the kitchen was fitted out with 1960s, 70s wall units and floor cupboards and worktop. Clearly, I've replaced this with something a bit more in keeping with the period of the house. And this is typical of the kind of kitchen that would have been used in the 1930s and the 1940s. However, we are using slightly more modern technology than was used in this house at the time that it was built in 1936. I'll just cover that first. Looking up at the ceiling, you might be able to see an L shape there where there was actually another wall, and that part of the room was sectioned off into a larder, and that's why it's got its own window and electric light, and that was to keep fresh food in. Now we've got a fridge which runs on electricity, and that's from the 1930s, but originally the house relied on fresh air and a north-facing window to keep the food cool. Over here in this recess, there were 3 solid fuel powered appliances, and there are 3 flues which go up into the chimney stack above. Where the cooker is sat now was a boiler for boiling the hot water and heating the towel rail in the bathroom upstairs. In the middle was a range, and on the left hand side beside the sink was a copper, and that was something, it was a big tub for boiling up your washing to make sure that the whites came nice and clean. Now beside the copper was a double sink, or a sink and tub, with one of those sinks being deep for doing the washing in, and there would have been a draining board just to the left of that double sink, and then over here was a built-in cabinet, a kitchen cabinet, and then there's the door going through to the back hall with the coal stores and garage. So there really wasn't very much room in this kitchen, and as I say, it was all powered by solid fuel, coal and coke, and the larder was just powered by fresh air, if you like. The floor's concrete, and it's covered in linoleum tiles from the Forbonnier factory in Kirkcaldy, and the walls are just concrete up to about 3 feet and then plaster, and that's all painted with gloss paint, as is the ceiling. This is a New World radiation gas cooker which came out in the late 20s. I think the patent mark on this one is 1929, so it was probably from 1930 or thereabouts. And the innovation with this type of cooker is that it had a gas regulo on the oven, which meant that instead of setting the heat of the oven using a gas tap and judging how much heat there was from the flame, you actually set this thermostat to the heat that you needed for your particular recipe, and then the oven would be kept at that temperature throughout the cooking process. And this made it much more easy for the housewife to get reliable results from the cooking. This is a wee instruction plate about how to use the control on the gas oven. We have some electrical appliances here which, like the gas cooker, are from about 1930. That's a Belling electric hot plate which has 3 settings of low, medium and high, which you can cook on, and that is an electric kettle. It's chrome plated with a Bakelite handle, and that, once switched on, doesn't switch itself off, so you have to be careful to not forget about it. If you did forget about it, it would boil dry, and then the safety mechanism would push the plug out of the bag, and that does work effectively, but you would end up with a kitchen like a sauna with the walls running with steam. A lady named Kathy who visited us a couple of years ago told me about how she grew up on Lewis, and her mother, who had two sisters in Glasgow, used to send them eggs in a box like this through the post. And the two sisters, of course, loved receiving the eggs from home. And when the box was empty, it needed to be returned. So what they did was they filled it with blue ribboned biscuits because they worked at the Macfarlane and Lang biscuit factory. So when the egg box arrived back on Lewis, it was a great day for Kathy, who really enjoyed getting the chocolate biscuits because they were something that weren't readily available to them at that time. There is no shortage of recipe books available to see how people used to eat and what they used to eat. That's the one that came as a companion to our gas cooker. This one is from the National Milk Publicity Council, and that's encouraging people to use more milk. You can see there's a picture of a lady with a cooker rather like ours, and maybe if her family's very lucky indeed, she's made them meat mould, which looks very appetizing. We have got the good old Biro book, of course, which still makes excellent cakes. This particular cookery book here is from the gas board, and look, it says at the bottom, gas gives you more time off. And it has illustrations of all the different types of appliances that you can get that run on gas and that save you time in the home. This one is from Pyrex, and it shows you how to use their glassware, which is oven proof, and some of the dishes that you can make. This book is for recipes using the Electrolux gas refrigerator. Now, we used to have one of these before we got our big wooden fridge there, and it's one of these white things that stands on legs, and ours originally ran on gas and was converted in the 1950s to electricity, and they also ran on paraffin as well, which is quite a wonder of science how they worked, but they were available from the 1930s. And then again in the 1940s, when people had to learn new skills and there was an emphasis on trying to use homegrown food rather than imports, there was this kind of thing. This is Grow More Bulletin number 1 of the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. And this showed you how you could grow various foodstuffs in your own garden. And a companion to that, companion to the Grow More Bulletin number 1, is this book from the RHS, which shows you the dishes that you can make with the food that you have grown in your garden. And additionally, there's this book from the Ministry of Food, again from the rationing period, showing people how to cook effectively with perhaps different ingredients than they were used to, and which came in as substitutes to what they usually had available, and also gluts of certain types of produce rather than the spread that people were used to. The Ministry of Food also produced a range of leaflets to help housewives use the kinds of products that were available during the war, maybe that were replacing other things that we're more used to. Leaflet number 18 tells you how to use semolina, and it suggests semolina mould, which is probably quite nice to have after you've had your meat mould. We've got cooking white fish, meals without meat, using soya flour, and then a couple of seasonal ones there. Look, Christmas pudding, Christmas cake, mock almond paste. A few of those. And for when you did get hold of a piece of meat, making the most of meat, they wanted to make sure that there wasn't any waste and you got all the goodness out of what you had managed to buy using your coupons. Making the most of milk. Cakes, biscuits and scones, which sounds nice and encouraging, but then it says without eggs. So that would help you overcome the challenge of cooking without fresh eggs. And also food for invalids and convalescents, again to make sure that they were getting the goodness that they needed out of the foodstuffs that were available, but in a more appetizing way, because as I'm sure you will have heard on television programs, some of these alternative recipes weren't always as palatable as the government made out. Our fridge was made by the Stern Engineering Company over by Glasgow, and it has car door handles, wooden frame and plywood boarding on the outside, and on the inside of the cabinet and the doors we've got white clean asbestos panels, and it still works very well. It's got a wee freezer locker there, you can see that it needs defrosting, that's a job for later, and it's got quite high capacity. It's a big fridge. Most people would not have had the money to pay for a fridge like this, and either they would have had a larder like this house did back in the 30s and 40s, or if they could afford a fridge it would have been very small. This is quite a big one, which you would have found in a very large house indeed, not necessarily a house like this. At the time this house was built, most houses of this size, and indeed much smaller, would have had an indicator board like this, so that the owners could ring for service. Now this house doesn't have any wiring for an indicator board, so this is actually an imposter. This shouldn't be here, and I've only put it up because I happen to have bought it for a house that we had planned to move to before we actually secured this house. And here's how it works.